what is, I think, essential is for people to understand what banks are doing. And that's what BOCC helps with. I think people understand this other dimension of, it's not just the fossil fuel companies doing this big, bad, evil thing. It's the banks are providing them their needed money for that. And when we have more people understanding that, it gives people more tools to go out into the streets and take action or go put pressure on these banks.
Hello and welcome to episode 7, season 2 of the RAN Wrap-Up, Rainforest Action Network's look at the good, the bad, and the ugly in news from around the world affecting the climate and all those that depend on it. As always, we're taking a look this week at the issues that will ultimately affect all of us, what we can do about it, and what we are doing about it here at Rainforest Action Network. Last episode, we talked with Ginger Cassidy about our Community Action Grants program, where we have given hundreds of thousands of dollars to frontline communities around the world to fight back against those who are destroying the planet. And a powerful example of strong community fights is happening on the east coast of the United States as the Mountain Valley Pipeline begins to snake its way through the mountains, waterways, and ecosystems. But people have been fighting back and have seen some successes, but the fight, it's far from over. We need you to head on over to our action page and send a quick email to Bank of America and tell them to stop financing the companies behind the Mountain Valley Pipeline. But wait, how do we know Bank of America is financing this project? Well, there's a great report called Banking on Climate Chaos that comes out every year that details what banks are funding what projects and how much they are spending. And how much are they spending? That's a great question. Over the last 8 years, the top 60 banks in the world have poured $6.9 trillion into the fossil fuel industry. And today we're talking with two of the people who sunk months and months of work into putting this information into your hands. Welcome, April and Caleb. Thanks so much for being here. Can you tell us who you are and what do you do at RAM?
I am April Merleaux. I am the research manager on the climate and energy team at RAN.
And my name is Caleb Schwartz. I'm a research and policy analyst on the climate and energy team at RAN.
Thanks so much for being here. You both just wrapped up our latest report, Banking on Climate Chaos. Can you tell us generally what is the report?
Yes. So Banking on Climate Chaos is our annual flagship report on the climate and energy team. It tabulates the financing from the world's top 60 biggest banks to the entirety of the fossil fuel industry. So it takes something that is very opaque, corporate financing to the fossil fuel industry, and publishes the data so that campaigners, the public, stakeholders, shareholders, investors, regulators, anybody who wants to see how much money banks are putting towards expanding the fossil fuel industry can see that.
We produce the report every year. This is the 15th annual edition of the report, and we produce it in coalition with 7 other organizations.
As you said, you do an enormous amount of work to put out this report, and that spreads across multiple organizations. And there's probably people out there that are like, a report? We want some action. We want protests. We want hanging banners off of buildings and bridges and stuff like that. But this report, actually has a really big impact. Can you tell us, how and why this report makes such huge waves throughout the industries?
I have to say, I've been getting some angry emails from some banks. I guess it's a good sign when the banks are blowing up your inbox. I think a lot of campaigners use this data to help shape their campaigns and to really design strategies to try to move their targets. It definitely gives campaigners, the data gives campaigners another angle that they can use when they're fighting some really dirty fossil fuel projects. And the banks don't like it. The banks don't want us to share this data. They don't report it themselves. They don't make it easy to figure it out. And they would rather if it wasn't public. So kind of makes a big deal.
Banks have been feeling a lot of pressure from the climate movement, from frontline groups and organizations fighting fossil fuel projects in their homes to disclose and prove to the world that they are not financing these destructive, extractive projects. And we see that efforts like Banking on Climate Chaos sort of force banks' hands.
Is there an example of the report maybe moving a corporation or being a part of moving a corporation and pushing them to do better?
We had a conversation with a bank this year that was a bank we hadn't talked to before. And they were looking at our list of companies and they were saying, we don't really understand why you're including these companies. In particular, they were pointing to one company that does develop renewables. And they were saying, why would you include a company that develops renewables in your fossil fuel report? And we said, well, because actually this company has a stake in and is spending to fund what they're going to do next. They're putting that money into the Mountain Valley Pipeline. And the Mountain Valley Pipeline, we know, is a really destructive gas pipeline in the southeastern part of the United States that we've got frontline groups like fighting really hard against. And those kinds of conversations, I think, really giving banks some tools to look at their clients differently. I think that's one place where the data can make a difference. We saw some banks, not all, unfortunately, step away from the Rio Grande Valley LNG terminal that came to final investment decision last summer, and they had a little bit of a hard time finding bank financing. So I think when campaigners, when impacted communities have access to this data, it gives them a route that they can follow to try to hold these corporations accountable.
When it comes to financing fossil fuels, what banks are like the worst of the worst? Who's at the top of the list?
This year, we saw a rise in the rankings by the top 3 Japanese banks. That was one trend that was revealed by a BOCC report. The big 6 American banks are always high in the rankings. We have seen every year since 2016, JP Morgan Chase tops the list. Bank of America is pretty high up on the list as well. One finding from this year's report is that the top 6 U.S. banks are also the top financiers of fracking in 2023.
The 3 Japanese mega banks are really high on the list, and I think that's really driven by an increase in financing for methane gas, or liquefied methane gas, what people call LNG. Big increase in financing for that sector in 2023, and that's driving the increase for the banks that did actually show an increase in financing between 2022 and 2023. So overall, financing for fossil fuels in our report is down between 22 and 23, but 27 banks increased their financing. So bucked that trend of the overall data. And that factor, I think, is driven almost entirely by that liquefied methane gas.
That was kind of my next question, because there's a chart on the site that kind of shows that fossil fuel financing is dropped from like 916 billion in 2021 to 705 billion in 2023. Like, are we moving in the right direction? Is that a good thing? Or is it an indicator that banks are kind of moving money away from one sector and pumping it into another, like you said, the methane LNG?
I think it's a little bit of both. I want to be hopeful about those numbers. It's a 2 years in a row we see a decline, and so I think there's some room for hope. On the other hand, I think there are some factors outside of the control of banks that shape that decline in financing numbers. So interest rates are higher. When interest rates are higher, companies are going to borrow less. So they're just not coming and asking to borrow money. On top of that, for the last 2 years, oil, gas, and coal prices have been really high. So those companies have been making a ton of money. They've actually paid off a lot of their debt instead of taking on new debt.
I would also add to that that we saw over $340 billion of financing to companies actively expanding fossil fuels. And this is in a time when the International Energy Agency, not a radical organization by any means, is saying that we can't have any new financing after 2021 of fossil fuel expansion if we're going to, as a world, be able to limit global heating to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is a critical goal grounded in justice. Even with that decrease in financing, the number for expansion should be at 0. There should not be any financing to developing new oil and gas fields, exploring, to building pipelines that are going to be around for 30, 40, 50 years. It's really quite scary when you look at the details about how much of this financing, these big capital projects are going into building things that are going to be around for decades past these really critical climate deadlines that the international community has agreed upon. Another trend we're seeing is that financing for acquisitions has gone up this year. It's at its highest since 2020. And so the oil and gas industry is consolidating. We're seeing oil and gas companies buying up smaller oil and gas companies and becoming these large kind of conglomerates with more and more power. And at the same time, they're rolling back their own climate goals. They're sort of stepping up and becoming a little bit more vocal about the fact that they plan to keep producing oil and gas. And so we're seeing an industry sort of start to lash back at the climate movement and sort of show its teeth, because it's a dying industry. It's going away, but they're going to keep trying to profit as long as they can. That's quite concerning. We would like to see a little bit more moral consciousness from these financial leaders, but that's not going to happen on its own.
In this kind of timeline, we're seeing, big reports coming out and getting the juicy details and numbers and research and passing it on to activists who are using it in their campaign work. But is there something like we as individuals can do? Like, people want to know, like, do we close our accounts? Do we cut up our credit cards? Like, what do we do as individuals to make a difference in this situation?
Yeah, I think critically, and I know this is talked a lot about on this this particular show and at RAN, I think critically people need to get organized and they need to build power together. And so that might mean finding a local frontline group or a local site fight in your community, because fossil fuel expansion is happening all over. There may be projects you don't know about, but there are people fighting, miles away from you, or taking action and sending a message to the banks. I think that we have seen pressure campaigns work very effectively in the past, has been talked about on the show a lot. And what is, I think, essential is for people to understand what banks are doing, and that's what BOCC helps with. I think people understand this other dimension of it's not just the fossil fuel companies doing this big bad evil thing. It's the banks are providing them their needed money for that. And when we have more people understanding that, it gives people more tools to go out into the streets and take action or go put pressure on these banks.
There are times where moving your money, I think, is a good choice. And especially if you're a high net worth individual, for sure, consider moving your money and definitely make your opinion heard to your bankers. But I also think that some of the real leverage against the banks is actually from their larger scale clients. For example, what bank does my town use? That is a question that I could ask. I live in a not huge town and I have access to my city councilor and my mayor. I could go ask my mayor, like, who do we bank with? And are you willing to talk to the bank about your concerns about the financing they're providing for fossil fuels? Maybe if you belong to a union, where does your union hold its money? Where does your employer hold their money? So there are a lot of places where our lives are surrounded by a world that these financial institutions create. Because we trust them with our money, we should be expecting a really high level of attention from them to these kinds of risks that are putting the whole planet and humanity and future generations at risk.
We can make a really big impact with one or two or three people in how our local community banks or is insured and things like that, and that can really stack up and make a big change really quick. So thanks for bringing that up. Great point. And thanks so much for all your work. I think the report is so important and it provides such critical resources and information to the front lines and activists around the world that are doing the hard work and making change, but they really can't do it without these numbers. So thanks so much. I can't wait to see the report in 2025. Big numbers coming out. Better start working soon. This report comes out every year, and to say it's a lot of work would be an understatement. So big thanks to April and Caleb for making it happen with all your hard work and dedication. As always, if you'd like to get more information and taking action or getting more involved, head on over to our webpage at ran.org, where you can join us in using people power to challenge business as usual. And why would you want to do that? Because we win.